Chapter 171 Fiend. Monster. Supreme Ruler. Death Omen Star. In the past, she was feared by the entire world and was called by many names. However, ORM was forced to find that all of those names were insufficient. Those T.I.Tles were unfitting to properly describe this Rapazmoffel, who was far more abnormal than abnormal could be. This was despair. This woman was a personification of the very notion of despair. He bit and crushed her with his fangs which could shatter even planets. He showered her with a roar which could annihilate even celestial bodies. He made her get caught up in planetary core explosions. He trapped her in a prison of time. He even shoved her into the Sunday. Normally, an individual would have died, would they not? No matter how one thought about it, there was no way it should not have worked. Yet she looked calm and undisturbed. It was as if it was not affecting her. To top it all off, she was not even taking things seriously. She had not even taken hold of a weapon either. What was he to do? Against an enemy such as despair, was there even anything that he could do? Was there any possible course of action he could take in order to defeat that thing? Having used up too much of his power, he could not even maintain his Ouroboros form any longer and unwittingly turned back into his humanoid form. To clarify, whilst his real form was that of an Ouroboros, his humanoid form served the purpose of decreasing his energy consumption. During moments when his life was truly in danger, ORM's survival instincts would kick in and he would forcibly transform into his humanoid form in order to decrease his energy consumption, even if just ever so slightly, so that the probability of his survival would increase. However, on the battlefield, it was an extremely fatal flaw. Rapaz grabbed ORM's head and then soared across S.P.A.C.E at a speed faster than light. She flew right out of the solar system and slammed him down into a planet which was probably multiple times bigger than Midgard. Yet, the momentum from the throw was not lessened. Instead, fractures ran through the planet. And it was destroyed. The planet was unable to bear the single hit that it had suffered, and so it crumbled before proceeding to explode. In that high temperature, Rapaz grabbed ORM again and took flight once more. Then, relying on pure strength, she threw ORM into the sun as if she was throwing a javelin. The moment ORM said right through its H.E.L.lish flames and came out from the opposite side, he was caught by Rapaz, who had circled around the sun in the meantime. She was as relaxed as someone who had just taken a small detour. It was beyond ridiculous. After all, the sun was not that tiny. It was followed by a barrage of punches. Although ORM desperately tried to dodge them, they were not at a speed that he could hope to avoid. All of the punches were thrown so fast that they left the speed of light in the dust, practically landing on him the moment they were released. There was essentially no time difference between the initiation of the attack and the moment that it hit. It was as if the causal nexus was reversed. Rapaz's punches, which left even light itself behind, were thrown after it had already been determined that the attacks themselves had hit. To ask someone to dodge such a thing was pointless. It could be said that ORM had fared well up until this point. Without the slightest bit of flattery, it could be said that ORM had fought very well until this point. But he had done a bit too well. After all, he had gotten Rapazmoffel into the mood. To be recognized as a strong opponent by Rapaz directly signified an end to the battle. It equated to the beginning of a one-sided beat-down. Now that things had turned into this, there was nothing which could be done. The only thing which he was permitted to do was become unable to resist and be oppressed as if it was the most natural thing in the world. His head was grabbed and his face was slammed into her knee. Then, his neck was grabbed and an overwhelming amount of magical power was directly poured into him. His whole body was burned and battered. In this state where he could no longer even twitch, ORM was taken a hold of and flown all the way back to Midgard. Right before passing through the stratosphere, Rapaz dropped her speed before finally landing back down on the same uninhabited island they had originally started fighting on. But the moment she did so, the uninhabited island crumbled away. Oh, crap. I didn't hold back enough. Feeling guilty for having accidentally destroyed the uninhabited island which had been free of any sins, she used alchemy to reconstruct the island. Unfortunately, because she did not completely remember the shape of the island, it ended up being shaped a little differently. She then placed ORM, who was on the verge of death, on top of that reconstructed island. As I expected. I should have refamiliarized myself first before fighting. With my power suddenly going back to how it originally was, I couldn't hold back properly. My self-restraint is not good enough. While thinking such a thing, Rapaz looked up. When she did, she saw the S.H.I+P, Argo, which must have rushed to her whereabouts after they had detected the two of them fighting. Bennett Nash could also be seen sitting on the S.H.I+P with her arms crossed, looking dissatisfied. Well, you guys got here quickly. Thinking so, Rapaz wanted to laugh out loud. After all, only about 2 seconds worth of time had elapsed since the battle with ORM had begun. In fact, if the time that had been taken to have the useless conversation was removed, it was doubtful whether even 2 seconds had come to pass. Yes, exactly. That whole battle, from the moment it had started until now, had only taken about 1 second. As both sides were operating in a time axis which was multiple stages higher than normal and fighting whilst accelerating their perceptions of time, the amount of time which had passed said in reality was merely a moment. If they were to fight at a speed faster than light, it would essentially mean they were fighting whilst time was stopped. If anything, one should be praising ORM for having been able to keep up with a fight to this extent. At the very least, before the battle had begun, Rapaz had predicted that it would be possible to defeat ORM within half a second's worth of time. The 12 stars leapt out of the S.H.I+P and came towards Rapaz. At the same time, Terra came DOS.H.I+NG over and cut into the S.P.A.CE between Rapaz and ORM. Rapaz-sama, are you alright? There's no problem. Leaving that aside, can you help out the Demon King and heal him? After saying that, Rapaz looked around at her surroundings, and realized that Virgo was nowhere to be found. In one way or another, the battle against the Demon King, which had been a mental burden, was concluded peacefully. To this, I felt a slight sense of relief. Saying that everything had gone peacefully would be slightly off from the ordinary definition of the word peaceful. However, technically, I didn't end up killing him, so I'd appreciate it if you overlooked that. But, yeah, the Demon King had been far stronger than I had predicted he would be. I was not being sarcastic at all. That was my honest impression. It might sound pretentious saying it myself, but speaking very bluntly, there existed no creature in Midgard who would be able to win against me in a one-on-one battle. The Ouroboroses were no exception to that statement. Against someone like me, although it wasn't all of it, he had been able to draw out 70% of my power. He should be proud of that outcome. If I summed my full power to be 100, the power of my daydreaming state, in other words, when I had initially returned to this world, would be around 24. Even when I was using Alkaid, it would be at most around 36. And at my weakest state, I was approximately as strong as Leon. Putting it that way, you should be able to somewhat understand how strong 70% of my strength was, no? The Demon King was able to draw that much out of me. Although the battle had ended up as a landslide victory in my favor, it could be said that he could not have fought any better. Are you not going to kill my father? If it were the old me, Wadas.H.I+, probably would have. But it's not like the current me is being cornered like how I was before. I'm not going to whip someone who's already down. When I answered Terra's question, all of the 12 stars looked at me with a puzzled expression. Out of all of them, Ares was the one who asked me a question, as if to represent everyone present. Rapaz-sama, something about your first person P.R.O. Noun is, yeah, I went back to what I was using before. Does it sound strange? No, it's nothing like that. It's just. It feels so nostalgic, and, for Ares, who had known me since I was still an adventurer, the first person P.R.O. noun that I was currently using would not have felt all that strange. Although he might have been a little surprised, he was looking at me with a sense of nostalgia. On the other hand, the ones who were actually bewildered were the members who had only known me during my time as the Supreme Ruler. To be more specific, they were Scorpius, Agacaros, Pollux, Castor and, well, actually, I suppose everyone except for Karkinos. To begin with, the only ones amongst the 12 stars who had known me during my time as an adventurer were Aries, Taurus, and Karkinos. Looking back on things, it felt a little nostalgic, but, originally, I hadn't even had any intention of taming Karkinos. It had all started when I was attempting to tame another magical beast, but it just so happened that he accidentally got between me and the magical beast at that very specific moment and ended up getting tamed by mistake. By the way, what happened to Virgo? She's so. She's talking to Merak with part he knows right now. To Merak. Virgo and Merak, it was not as if the two of them being together was too inconceivable. After all, both of them were flugels. In Virgo's case especially, she had never had the opportunity to properly speak with any other flugel other than myself. Although there had been some flugel predict.i.p.ans during the tournament held at Dropnir, we had done nothing more than look at them from a distance. Technically I was a flugel too, but I was essentially a derivative bugged race that had been born out of them. If I wanted to be cool and name myself, I suppose I would belong to something like a dark flugel race. Whilst a race with only a single individual in it gave off a slightly cool feeling, it also felt quite lonely. Well, for now, shall we start by exchanging information? I want to know what happened while I was away. After Pollux nodded and concurred with my suggestion, I headed towards ORM, who was down on the floor. As Virgo was not here, it could not be helped. After all, amongst the 12 stars, Dina was the only one besides Virgo who specialized in healing. Unfortunately, both of them were away. Whilst some people here, like Pisces, Sagittarius and Castor, were also able to use those skills, it was merely at the level of first aid. As such, there was no other option but for me to do it myself. At least, that was what I was thinking. However, Terra stood in my way, as if to protect ORM. It was not like I was planning to finish him off. Well, I supposed I was like that 200 years ago. It could not be helped that he would be on guard against me. Because I had gained an objective perspective, I was able to understand that the me of the past was indeed cruel. After all, back then, if I even caught sight of a demon in the corner of my eye, I would have madly chased them and finished them off. For now, I should try to get Terra out of the way first. Thinking that, I tried to take action. But at that moment, ORM, who was on the verge of death, stood up and came between me and Terra, causing me to stop moving. Even though this guy shouldn't be conscious anymore. Don't harm Terra. Ilu.s. Tration from Albolite Novel Volume 8. What came out as a mumble was, without a doubt, a show of fatherly love towards his son. After hearing that, I was REA.s. Assured. It was as I had expected. I now completely understood the reason why ORM had betrayed the G.O.Dis. It was nothing peculiar. At the end of it all, he was just another father. He wanted to protect his son. With just that alone, it was sufficient reason to start rebelling against the G.O.Dis. He was just an ordinary father which could be found anywhere. There was a world of difference between him and my foolish father. Honestly speaking, I was quite jealous of Terra. After hearing the words that came out of ORM's mouth, Terra also had an expression of disbelief. So Terra, it seems like this is the answer. It looks like he was rebelling against the G.O.Dis scenario for your sake. Father, now get out of the way. Before it's too late. I lightly pushed Terra aside with my hands and held them towards ORM. I then poured healing divine magic onto him whilst I spoke to him. If it was him, just this much should be sufficient to make him conscious. Hey ORM, I already know the reason why you challenged me. You're an Ouroboros. Even if you were to challenge the G.O.Dis, that body of yours won't allow you to bare its fangs against the G.O.Dis. And not just against the G.O.Dis herself but even against her followers. And for that reason, you must have wanted me as your sword so that you can fight the G.O.Dis, correct? The reason why ORM challenged me and the reason why he had waited until I had recovered my power. The answer to that was nothing other than because he wanted me as his fighting prowess. It was impossible for him to fight against the G.O.Dis. It was not an issue about how strong he was. It was an issue with his primal instinct as an Ouroboros. That was why he needed a sword that he would be able to use to fight against the G.O.Dis. However, when that sword came back, it was rusted. Although it was still better than the other dull swords lying around everywhere, it was far from something that would be able to challenge the G.O.Dis. That was why he had waited until the sword had regained its original form before he challenged it with everything that his body and soul had to offer. But look at what had happened. Courageous? No, it was more correct to say that it was reckless. Since he knew how strong I originally was, he should have known full well that a single Ouroboros would not be able to win against me. Yet, even then, he still challenged me. He must have fervently wished for a future where his son would be able to survive. I too agreed to this battle with that thought in mind. Become my sword, Demon King ORM. Lend me your strength, so that I may fight against the G.O.Dis. I did not have a skill which would be able to free him from the G.O.Dis's shackles. However, by placing another shackle over the pre-existing shackles, it was possible for me to offset and counteract it. If my dominion over him Serpa.S. said his natural instincts, it should not be impossible for him to fight against the G.O.Dis and her underlings. If I become your sword, would I also be able to fight? I won't be able to make a definitive promise, but the probability is not zero. At the very least, this suggestion is far more realistic than the chances of you winning against me. I see. Then please, do it. ORM smiled faintly, then closed his eyes without any resistance. Looking back on it after everything had concluded, it was a simple battle. At the end of it all, it was just a simple battle with the premise that the losing party would become a subordinate of the winning party. Whichever way it rolled, the fact that we would be picking a fight against the G.O.Dis would not change. It was just a childish playground brawl to figure out who was better. That was the truth behind the battle which had destroyed many planets. Although ORM must have had a fear that if I was the one who came out on top, then the entire demon race would be exterminated. Having said that, I was the winner, and nothing was going to change that. As it was a privilege awarded to the winner, I was going to cast the skill without any reservations. Capture. I activated a skill from the Monster Tamer CLA.S.S, then captured ORM. In all likelihood, there was no other way for ORM to challenge the G.O.Dis. I placed my own shackles on top of the G.O.Dis's shackles and put him under my dominion. With this, in the future, when there was a conflict between his natural instincts which would be screaming "Do not fight the G.O.Dis" and my command to fight the G.O.Dis, if my power of dominion was superior, it would be possible to offset his instincts. I shouldn't have to state this, but this was a pretty absurd method. If I were to A.N.A.logos it to something, let's A.S.sum there was a person who really wanted to sleep. And that person's boss came around and loudly roared at them to not fall asleep, then forcibly grabbed hold of that person and made them stand up. What I was trying to do was very close to that. Having said that, if I was the one who had lost the battle, then I would have been the one who would be getting tamed, so I would allow him no room to complain. It's said that, in the past, the constellations of the Serpent Bearer and the Serpens were one and the same. Although there's no empty seat within the 13 stars right now, I'll welcome you as part of the Serpent Bearer. I shall hereby bestow upon you your name. Your star is Serpens. Tyrannical 13 heavenly stars, the other half of the Serpent Bearer, Serpens of the Serpent. 2. I bestowed ORM with an alias and forcibly placed him within the tyrannical 13 heavenly stars. To be honest, it would have been fine to bestow him with a random name, but it would have looked unbecoming for a random star to be stronger than the 13 stars. It was probably better to forcibly place him within the 13 stars. As for the fact that the 13 stars now had 15 individuals within them despite being called 13, well, who cares? Fundamentally speaking, I'm very whimsical. Chapter 172. For Merak, it was a regret from his past that he could not get over. He had betrayed his friend and plunged the world, which had almost been unified, back into turmoil. Why had he done such a thing? Why hadn't he thought about it a bit more? He could not understand why himself. Even though they were his own, he could not understand his own thought processes at the time at all. Even the subsequent battle against the Demon King, which he had attempted as a way to atone for his sins, ended up in a miserable defeat. Afterwards, he ended up passing a few days on top of his bed, unconscious. Yet, the misfortunes did not stop piling up. Underpinning the fact that he had lost, the demon race exploited the occasion and invaded. By the time he had regained consciousness, everything was long over. Although they had barely managed to successfully defend the kingdom, many lives had been lost. Beyond anything else, the event which had tormented Merak the most was how the whereabouts of his wife and daughter had become unknown. The relations H.I+P between him and his wife was by no means a loving marriage. They had initially only become engaged as a result of their parents' decision due to their positions as fellow members of well-established families within the Flugel race. Nevertheless, they were still family. It was only when they had disappeared that Merak realized the significance of his wife's presence. However, reality was cruel mischief. The corpse of his wife was found the following day. The body was found quite a distance away at the foot of Vanaheim, along with the corpses of her guards. In all likelihood, she had been killed while they were attempting to get away. In the end, the case was closed without him being able to locate the whereabouts of his daughter. Having lost many important things to him all at once, Merak was stricken with grief. His missing daughter was a child similar in appearance to his wife with pink hair, and possessed pure white wings just as he did. "Are you my father?" That should be how it is. Although, I don't know if I have the right to call myself your father. They were inside Migres's mansion, which was half destroyed. On the surface, Merak looked calm and collected. However, he was unable to raise his head. He knew that if he were to raise his head and see Virgo, he would want to give her a hug with his tainted hands. He knew clearly that his already fragile tear glands would burst open in a flash. He felt that he did not have the right to call himself a father. Nor did he have the right to give her a hug. But even then, he was joyful and relieved. That she had continued to live on, with just that, he could not have felt a greater happiness. Partheno-sama, my lady. From the bottom of my heart, I offer you my deepest gratitude. Truly. I don't even know how to express how grateful I am. You should express your gratitude to your wife's grave. I didn't do anything at all. In all probability, after predicting that they wouldn't be able to successfully get away, she hid Virgo and voluntarily chose to become the bait herself. It was only by chance that I picked up Virgo. In the face of Merak's gratitude, Parthenos crossed her arms and responded curtly. Merak seemed to have been paying her respect in her position as the former guardian of the sanctuary. However, the 7 heroes were not existences that Parthenos favored. Even if those individuals were to offer her words of gratitude, she would be troubled trying to figure out how to respond. Instead of me, why don't you say something to Virgo instead, eh? Isn't this supposed to be a reunion between a parent and their child? Why, yeah, you're right. I know that, but I don't know what I should say this late in time. The fact that they were able to reunite with one another made him happy, it as if his dream had come true. If it indeed turned out to be nothing more than a dream, he wished he wouldn't wake up from it. But on the other hand, Merak was at a loss for words. He felt that whatever he said would come out cheap and shallow, making his daughter feel unpleasant as a result. Because of that worry, he was unable to say anything. There were things he wanted to say. In fact, there were plenty of them. I wanted to see you again. I'm glad you're alive. You look just like your mother. You've become beautiful. Are you happy right now? How have you been up until now? Have you ever encountered anything you disliked? Have things been tough for you? But before he could ask each and every one of those questions, his conscience would whisper within himself. Do you even have the right to ask such a thing? Do you even have the face to act like her father this late in time? Thinking such a thing, he just could not bring himself to say anything. Father. I don't know what I should say, but I'm glad that I was able to meet with you. With just those words, Merak burst into tears. I'm glad to have met you too. Even though he wanted to say just that, he could not vocalize the words because of his tears. In the face of him being like that, Virgo smiled warmly and affectionately, then gently placed her hands on his shoulders. What a good-for-nothing man you are. A certain individual cannot read the mood, thus she will be removed. In response to Parthenos, who did not read the mood and said unnecessary things, the gatekeeper Golem, which was on standby, grabbed and restrained her. And, as if it was carrying a cat around, the Golem, which could unexpectedly read the atmosphere, took Parthenos away and left the building. Illu.s.tration from Albolite novel V8 ** after acquiring ORM as an ally, we were aboard the S.H.I+P Argo and were flying towards Svalin at our top speed. I was informed that the guy called Sol had been defeated by Leon. Additionally, Taurus, although heavily injured, had been retrieved by Pollux and Castor. Furthermore, whilst I was away, a lot of things had happened. For example, Parthenos had turned into a heroic spirit, Virgo had awakened, and the young boy Asei and his amusing gang of friends had worked to persuade the kings of Laevitian and Dropnir. After settling my business with ORM, the only problems left for me were Libra, Dina, and the other Ouroboroses. The G.O.Dis should already be trying to find Dina. Before she managed to do so, I would have to finish up doing what I needed to do. For the time being, I would have to evacuate every living creature in the world. Very soon, Midgard would be destroyed. This was already a predetermined fact. As long as the G.O.Dis did not change her mind, it was a course of events which could not be avoided. It was precisely because of this that I had no option but to pretend to lose in the battle 200 years ago. Even if I had won the battle, if the G.O.Dis decided to move the Ouroboroses, every living thing would have died. There was no meaning to such a victory. But this time would be different. After all, we had spent 200 years preparing for it, we would not make the same mistake again. Though to be fair, the credit for half of the preparations belonged to Dina and not me. The Ouroboroses had been sealed as insurance so that they would not move until this point. However, there was no longer any need for them. After the Argo arrived in the airs.p.a.ce above Svalin, we all leapt off the S.H.I+P and landed in front of Migres's half-destroyed mansion. The inside of the building had already been somewhat tidied up and I spotted Virgo and Merak having a conversation across the table. For some reason, Merak was sobbing as if he was overcome by emotion and I was taken aback a little. Outside the building, the hero's entire party was present, and for some reason, Parthenos was restrained by the gatekeeper as if she was a cat. What on earth were these guys playing at exactly? Gatekeeper, how are things looking? Everything looks good, Rupa-sama. Then it's fine. By the way, what did Parthenos do? I had judged that she was in the way of a reunion between a parent and their child, thus, I removed her. I see. Rupa-sama, can you say something to this guy? He doesn't understand how to treat a dead person properly. If the dead person is as energetic as you, there shouldn't be any problem. Although Migres and Mizar weren't present right now, they had probably already started taking action. Those two were not individuals who would lose sight of what to do knowing the world was about to perish. Normally, Merak should also be taking action, but, well, I suppose I could overlook him given the situation. I made it in time, huh? As I mumbled something to myself, the young boy Asei gave a puzzled response. It seemed that the G.O.Dis had not yet meddled with him. If we were to believe Dina's words, then there would definitely be some form of an action directed towards him, but in any event, he was still fine at this moment in time. Personally, it would be most convenient if that something were to be done while I was present in the area. After all, if I was present, most things could be handled. In any event, just the fact that he, despite being the hero, had not taken any hostile action towards us whatsoever until this point was a far happier miscalculation than he had been believing it to be. After all, if he had acted just as Dina and I had been thinking he would have long had his spirit broken, or would already have become AP.A.W.N under the G.O.Dis. The fact that such a piece had disappeared would signify that we had gained one piece, and at the same time, the G.O.Dis had lost one piece. On the board, this was insignificant yet significant. Using shogi, J.A.Payne's chess, as an example, it was just as if the G.O.Dis suddenly lost a piece on the board which she was eventually going to move. I supposed as an A.N.A. Loki, currently, on top of the board, they had the King General and the Ouroboroses which protected that king, so 2 gold generals and 2 silver generals. No, since they had already taken Libra and we predicted that Dina would also be taken from my side, they would pretty much be the flying chariot and the bishop. So I reckoned that they would place those units on the board soon. As for the current progress of the battle, I would say that I had the advantage 3 SEI, boy. I have a request for you. Would you hear me out? Why, yes. If it's something that I can do. It's something that only you can do. The fact that the young boy SEI was willing to work for our side was very convenient. From what I'd been told, apparently, he had gone as far as to discuss with the king of Leavition that I was not their enemy. With how things were, he would do better persuading the citizens than I was predicting he would. I could not do it. Since I was still the symbol of terror around the world, whatever I attempted to do would only give birth to rebellion. ORM was out of the question. He was even less suitable for this than I was. Leon was not even worth mentioning, and Bennett would only be able to move the citizens of Mjolnir. In that case, how about the members of the 7 heroes? Some people also opposed them due to the war 200 years ago. As a consequence, there was a need for a representative who was distinct from any of the above. If that representative just so happened to have the T.I.Tle of the hero, then there were no further objections. Soon, the G.O.Dis will move the Ouroboroses and Midgard will be destroyed. Before that happens, I want to force as many living creatures as possible away from this planet into the Ark. During that time, I want you to persuade and calm down the citizens of this world who will no doubt be in confusion. Of course, I'm not telling you to do it alone. I plan to get Migres and the rest to help out as well. For if the world were to perish, the people living in that world would also perish. If such a thing were to happen, that could no longer be called a victory. As such, I had prepared the Ark as much as possible so that all living things could evacuate into it. Unfortunately, because I did not have the leisure to be persuading people one by one, it would pretty much be done by force. I would throw them onto the Ark regardless of the person's will. Needless to say, doing such a thing would give rise to chaos. There were also sure to be people against it. However, if I were to come out and suppress those who were opposed to it, it would only have the opposite effect. Although it was possible for me to forcibly shut them up using my coercion, it would mean a repeat of what had happened 200 years ago. A reign which depended on oppressive power and fear would definitely give birth to a rebellion. Back then, I had not understood that. This was exactly the situation when the name of a hero could S.H.I plus any. He did not have to predict I.P.8 in battles. It was exactly because he had not taken part in any useless battles that he could do this. For something like that, rather than me. I mean, I'm weak, and I don't have the gravity like Rapasan has, and you're better exactly because you're weak. In the past, I relied on nothing but power to try and control everything. It ended up giving rise to fear among the people, and ultimately, it failed. In the past, I was weak. I was someone who had been oppressed. Because I hated that self, I sought power. I greedily coveted and wished for power. I dashed headfirst into countless battlefields, then I killed, and continued to kill some more. In the beginning, I must have had the mindset that I wanted to protect other weak individuals like myself. I kept saying that I would save an individual like my mother, who was kind but had no power. Then I got stronger some more, and by the time I realized it, I could no longer understand the hearts of the weak. I did not gain power. I ran away to power. Only the weak can understand the hearts of the weak. That makes you the most suitable one for the job. I patted his shoulder, and when I did, a small light enveloped him. What just happened? It's just a small trick. It's to make sure that no nuisances happen when you're persuading others. Don't worry about it. There's no detriment to you, and I'll make sure to properly undo it afterwards. I see, he did not run away to power. If it was him, irrespective of what the G.O.Dis attempted going forward, he should not lose sight of himself. It was exactly as Bennett had said. Those who walked independently on their own 2 feet would never become something like the G.O.Dis's doll. Furthermore, the exchanges of violence from one side to another which we would encounter from this point onwards were not battlefields which were suitable for him. Such vulgar fights were battlefields for people like myself. A battlefield for me and the G.O.Dis. Long story short, this was a fight between Alovinus and myself. I did not like her storytelling. She did not like me. We were screaming that and were trying to forcibly remove each other with brute power. It was nothing more, nothing less. Something like that was just vulgar, right? It was no different from the temper tantrums of children. The only problem was, the children having those tantrums would not lose to anybody when it came to power. So, that would end up happening, right? They had to figure it out. To decide once and for all who would come out on top. So, it's about time for it all to begin. The world's most high-leveled and pointless battle. Winter of Winds. 5. I activated a skill and covered the whole of Midgard with winds. At the same time, I activated the skill X-Gate. I let it pas.s through the s.p.a.ce time continuum and called forth that thing. The thing which was brought over was an extremely large s.h.i plus p, so extremely large that it was multiple i.2s of times larger than Blutgong. It was an evacuation vessel that had been built up by Dina and the Floresienses over the course of 200 years in order to survive the twilight of the G.O.ds6. Its length was easily over a few hundred kilometers. At this point, it was no longer an ordinary s.h.i plus p but as.p.a.ce battles.h.i plus p. Around the s.h.i plus p, there were sacred beasts which were once said to have protected the Hobbit's kingdom floating around. Cyria, Azure Dragon, Suzaku, Vermilion Bird, Byakko, White Tiger, and Genbu, Black Tortoise. 7. How grand. Is this the reason they were missing for the past 200 years? Hey, wait a minute. Why are these guys here? Aren't these plebs the ones this mistress killed back then? In response to the ark, which suddenly appeared out of thin air, let alone the young boy Sei, even Bennett and Scorpius were dumbfounded. There were also murmurs from the people of the city. Having said that, perhaps the people of Svalin had already been persuaded by Migraz, as they remained fairly calm. I manipulated the wind and first brought the s.h.i plus p to Svalin, which was closest to me. I then ripped the entire kingdom off the ground. I then covered the kingdom with as.h.i plus eld and placed the entirety of the kingdom into the ark. The ark, which was on standby, was laid out perfectly. There were open pas.sages here and there. Next, I went to the kingdom of Leavitian, then moved on to Lejarn and the other nearby territories. After that, it was Gillerhorn and Nectar. Although Nectar was a little far away, it was beyond favorable that every other humanoid domain was concentrated in a tiny area of s.p.a.ce. Alternatively, even this might have been within Dina's calculations. I also pulled the deep-sea kingdom of Skidbladnir from the bottom of the seas, which was followed by the various countries under the flag of Dropnir. Although I was making sure not to shake up the land too much, if 1 or 2 pieces of furniture were to be broken, I would like that to be overlooked. I would try and compensate for it afterwards. Wait, Rupasan. What exactly is this? Didn't I tell you? Midgard will soon perish. In that case, I can't just leave the people on the planet. I'm going to evacuate them to the best of my ability. Exactly, this planet would soon become a battleground. For the G.O.dis, the Ouroboroses, and us. In that case, it would be better for us if nothing else was here. If there were people around who would die just from being caught up in our fight, I would not be able to fight seriously. After all, this whole planet would soon turn into a dead planet. Now then, Alovinus. With this, there's no longer any need to hold back. If you're ready, then come at me from anywhere you'd like. Author note, Q. So what exactly did Rupas even do? A. She shaved off the surface of the Midgard, which included everything from kingdoms and living things to mountains and everything else, then chucked them all into the ark. The current Midgard is a barren land which had over half of its surface peeled away. In particular, the places where the humanoids were present has become a completely barren land. There is not even a single insect left. Oh, wait, Migres's mansion is still left in its place. After all, Ruppes is standing there right now. The Ark, it's a ridiculous object with a length well over a few hundred kilometers long. The time taken to construct it was 200 years. It's made so that as many inhabitants of Midgard as possible could be accommodated. There's even a water area for the deep-sea kingdom. Although there are different floors for the magical beasts, demi-humanoids, and humanoids, I have no intention of going into too much detail. Using combinations of magic and science, things like gravity and atmosphere were maintained. It's pretty much at a scale where it's fine to call it AS.P.A.CE colony. What exactly is fantasy? Ark, I've accepted living things, nature, and everything else. Please be at ease. Midgard, Could it be? This time, I'm really going to end up Paris.H.I+NG. Answer, yes. Chapter 173. In the skies above Midgard, which had had over half its surface peeled away by Ruppes, Dina was floating and looking down at something with an expression as if she was looking at garbage. Her eyes were dead and without any L.U.S.Tur, as if she was an exquisitely refined doll. Beside her was another of the G.O.Dis's dolls, Libra, who was awaiting orders from her real master. Truly, she's gone ahead and done it, that Ruppes. The voice of Dina came out from her mouth, yet the words and the tone used were nothing like how she spoke. The individual who was speaking was indeed Dina. However, her will was no longer present. Using her body, someone else, the G.O.Dis was speaking. Well, whatever. In this situation, I should be happy that she's kindly protecting the living things. After all, it's actually a Ha.S.Sle to bring them over from Earth. The voice which came out was Dina's. The thing speaking was Dina's body. But the one currently present was no longer Dina. Dina was overflowing with an undulation of power which she had never possessed before now. That divine power, which was surging out of her, made even the very fabric of the S.P.A.CE time continuum flicker. In all likelihood, her current fighting prowess rivaled even that of Ruppes. There are not many pieces left available to me. If it's Ruppes, perhaps she would be able to overcome even these Ouroboroses. Taking her capabilities into consideration, that's most likely going to be the case. Even for you, Alovina-sama, with a mere borrowed body, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to win against Mas. Ruppes. However, once the Ouroboroses are beaten back, it'll mean the start of the climax. The one to bring everything to a close, can't be anyone except the hero, I suppose. One Ruppes would most likely beat the Ouroboroses back. Whilst she would have to make some sacrifices, the one who would win in the end would be Ruppes. Anybody could understand that much. It was unknown how many sacrifices Ruppes would have to make. Needless to say, for the G.O.Dis, it would be preferable if everyone except for Ruppes were to perish. No, if one considered the might of the Ouroboroses, it was only natural that things should develop that way. Yet, even then, Ruppes would most likely win. Even in the worst-case scenario where she was the only one left, if it was her, she would end up winning. However, not even Ruppes could have predicted that even the Ouroboroses were nothing more than the opening act. Regardless of the age, it had always been the case that the hero would win at the very end. That was simply how the stories were meant to be. That was why, at the very end of it all, she would meet her end at the hands of the weak hero who was not even worth considering. Although, if it's her, the possibility of her overcoming my predictions is not zero. I have a question. Why does my lady seem to be having so much fun? Who knows? I wonder too. Perhaps it's because what's going to happen from now on is something that I myself wish to see. Dina. Correction, the G.O.Dis, who was using Dina's body, spoke as if she was sneering. Even A.S. Summing that she defeats the Ouroboroses and even wins against the hero, what exactly could happen? Although they're called the Ouroboroses, in the end, they're nothing more than fragile tools that I created whilst carefully trying to not destroy the universe. The same goes for the hero. Even if she were to beat them all, she can't reach me. Even Ruppaz should be well aware of such a thing. At the very least, all of your chess pieces, like the Ouroboroses, the hero, and us who are present here will all perish. Putting it that way, could you not say that she has liberated this world from my lady's control? I suppose that'd indeed be the case. But it may not turn out that way. I just have this feeling that she'll do something that I've never even considered. Although Dina's facial expression did not change, the way she spoke suggested that she was enjoying what was going on and was looking forward to what was to come. Ultimately, for the G.O.Dis, everything which was happening was nothing more than a game. If she lost, she would feel vexed. She might even feel dejected. But that was it. It was simply impossible that the G.O.Dis herself could be harmed in any way. That was exactly why she was acting so leisurely. It was exactly because she absolutely knew that she would win at the very end. That was why she was able to remain laughing. Indeed, if she lost in a game, she would feel bad, but the G.O.Dis could erase the very universe, game, itself whenever she felt like it. Then shall we begin? The end of the world. After saying that, the G.O.Dis activated the skill to move the Ouroboroses. The world shook. The earth divided, the wind raged and the weather became crazy and erratic. The first thing to appear was the personification of light. The sun Ouroboros, which was slumbering within the mountain of Vanaheim, awakened and then freed its enormous body from the ground. Its endlessly long body pierced into the sky before lapping around Midgard. Its appearance, which could only be described as abnormal, could even be seen by Ruppaz and the others. It was so big that it could no longer even be called a living thing. Looking at it, everyone except for Ruppaz and ORM felt a cold sweat. Even Bennett Nash, who was maintaining a calm appearance, could not help but sweat nervously. The sun Ouroboros's whole body was enveloped in S.H.I plus New York scales. Then the white Ouroboros, which looked almost divine, roared, causing the world to shudder. The next to appear was the personification of flame. An Ouroboros enveloped by deep crimson scales shot out along with a volcanic eruption, then intersected with the sun Ouroboros that had appeared shortly prior. Just from the appearance of the Ouroboros of the flame, the earth started evaporating, causing all of the remaining vegetation that Ruppaz had not retrieved to burn up. Midgard had effectively turned into a desert just from the mere fact that this Ouroboros had begun to move. This was followed by the appearance of a giant tree which pierced into the heavens. The World Tree, who held dominion over all plants in the world, was clad in lightning and did not burn even after being exposed to the fire Ouroboros's heat. From the other side, the very earth itself took the shape of an Ouroboros and revealed itself to be an Ouroboros who was enveloped in rocks and boulders. Combined, there were only 4 of them. However, all 4 of them were the very embodiment of what it meant to be transcendent. They possessed the world's biggest bodies and were protected by the world's hardest scales. They possessed the world's strongest power and were the arbiters representing the creation deity. Each of them only made its appearance when the world was going to be destroyed, yet at this very moment, all 4 of them had simultaneously made their advent, each executing a roar which reached the far ends of S.P.A.ce. Heed well, mankind. Hear therein, your age shall now be concluded. Such a will was conveyed throughout the world without the use of any humanoid words. Ilu.s. From Alba V8 light novel * listen, everyone. In a bit, I'm going to fight against Dina and Libra. I'll entrust the Ouroboroses to every one of you guys. After seeing the Ouroboroses and hearing Ruppaz's words, nervous looks appeared on all of the 12 stars. With Ruppaz's power, even if she had to face multiple Ouroboroses simultaneously, it would be possible to fight them on an even footing. However, she just suggested that she would not be predict.I.P.aiding in that fight. Her actions were not because she was underestimating them. If anything, it was the opposite. She only chose to act this way because she had determined that, without giving it her all, she would not be able to win against Dina, who was possessed by the G.O.Dis. Indeed, there had been a precedence of the G.O.Dis making use of someone else. But this time alone, things were different from the past. The G.O.Dis was making use of her own avatar. As a consequence, her fighting prowess would be beyond that of the Ouroboroses. Furthermore, Dina had already informed Ruppas of the G.O.Dis's power. Her HP was 999.9 billion too. This was Alovenus's HP from within the game. And the Alovenus from within the game was the avatar of the game's administrator, in other words, Dina herself. As such, yes, that's what it signified. It was her strength when she was possessed by the G.O.Dis. That was what it indicated. Very well. Then I'll take on the heavenly Ouroboros. 3ORM was the first individual to respond to Ruppas's arguably unreasonable order. If the other side was an Ouroboros, then it would be met with an Ouroboros of our own. Both sides would be arbiters and destroyers of the same CLA.S.S. ORM jumped up and, in a flash, transformed his body into that of an Ouroboros enveloped by black scales. Subsequently, he headed towards the enemy that he had to defeat. The next individual to step forward was Bennett Nash. In that case, I'll take on the fire Ouroboros. I'll check out just how capable these things called Ouroboroses actually are. The Ouroboroses were indeed at the pinnacle of the world. However, if the other side was an existence that was at the pinnacle, then it would be met with an abnormal existence of our own. An existence which trod above and beyond the rules that had been laid in place by the G.O.Dis. Bennett Nash smiled with an expression full of confidence, but she was interjected by the voice of another. Wait a minute. What is it, Fairy Princess? It's not that I've recognized them, but the situation is how it is. Since you're at it, take them along with you. Pollux spoke with displeasure and activated her skill. At the same time, a light downpoured from the sky and 4 men appeared from within. Bennett Nash was very familiar with the faces of the 4 individuals who appeared. The Sword King, Alioth. The Beast King, Dubhi. The Adventure King, Fekta. And the Smith King, Mizar. They were Pollux's sworn enemies from 200 years ago and the ones she had summoned once before when she was under the G.O.Dis's possession. She brought them back to this world once more. Pollux, you, brother, please don't say any more. After all, I haven't recognized them to be worthy. Pollux's skill was the ability to bring back an individual whom she recognized as a hero. In other words, if she did not recognize them as a hero, they could never be brought back. This was why, in the past, Pollux was unable to summon the 7 heroes however she wished. However, the fact that she had summoned them indicated that she had given them her recognition. After learning about their past, after learning that they had circuit misdances of their own, after seeing the interaction between Merak and Virgo, she had learned that they had gone through hards.h.I plus ps of their own. She must have subconsciously thought that it would be fine to forgive them. Pollux herself must have been self-conscious of this, however, she was feeling conflicted within herself. As such, she was unable to be honest and upfront, causing her to turn her back on them right after summoning them. It looks like I made it in time for the final feast. I've come too. Furthermore, Blutgong came flying over. A loud sound rang out from the speaker and the gigantic metropolis transformed into a giant humanoid-shaped golem before landing on the ground. Migrez, your mana engine is working great. Blutgong can fly now. Oh, my Blutgong is flying now. Oh. Why am I down there? Yo, me. I've come back from Valhalla to make up for the debt of my past sins. For it was an unexpected reunion of all of the members of the 7 heroes. Although there were now 2 Mizars, that was something trivial. Bennett Nash kept her arms crossed then sighed out loud. However, there was a faint curl on the edges of her lips. It seemed that, unlike before, they had been properly brought back as their complete selves. At this moment, Ruppas took out small vials from her pocket, then threw them at Migrez and Merak. This is, use it. It's an elixir. The final battle's about to begin, so if you guys remain at half of your strength, it'll be inappropriate. Thanks. After drinking the elixir handed to them by Ruppas, Migrez stood up from his wheelchair. At the same time, Merak's wings were restored as Taurus walked in on the group. Taurus, are your injuries fine now? Yeah, there's no problem anymore. My friend called me back, so I can't just keep napping. After saying just that, Taurus said by Rupas's side. There was no need for superficial words. A friend of his had come back and said she would fight. So all he needed to do was join the battlefield himself. If his friend was going to shed away her grudge from the past, then he would help her do so. From the past, this had always been the unchanging camaraderie and loyalty Taurus held towards Rupas. If I just grind my teeth and bear with it, AAA. Break a leg. Aldebaran. Taurus's unwavering fist sent Megrez and Merak flying. Both of their bodies were sent flying and slammed right into the ground. With this, the past was called even. At the very least, Taurus no longer had any intention to say anything else after this. Megrez and Merak stood up with swollen faces. However, they appeared refreshed. I've removed the curse which was on you guys. As for the rest, do whatever you want. 5. Thank you. We appreciate it. Megrez expressed his gratitude and then waved his arm at Taurus, who had his back turned towards them. At the same time, Levia came close to Megrez, and he jumped on top of it. Merak, on the other hand, spread his wings, which he had just regained, and flew up whilst Alioth also got on top of Levia. Bennett Nash, we'll also help you, Bear. 6. We'll fight with you. Looking exactly the same as they had back then, Dubhi and Fekta stuck their hands out and placed them on top of one another. Bennett Nash, whilst snorting in response, stuck out her own fist and did the same. To that, Mizar placed his palm on top, followed by Merak, who did the same. Finally, Megrez also placed his hand on the spot after getting off from Levia. However, for some reason, the moment Alioth attempted to get off from Levia to join them, Levia raised its neck and did not let him get off. Just don't be a burden. Of course. It's not like you don't know our strength, right? Leave your back to me. Let's go wild together again, Bennett. Bennett Nash spoke up as if she was spitting out those words, and Megrez, Merak, and Mizar responded with a voice full of confidence. They each knew of each other's capabilities. Whilst it was a little irritating for her, Bennett Nash was not someone who could not understand that they were a useful group of individuals. Then whatever. If you're saying you'll come along, then feel free to come along. Utilize that so-called power of yours to the fullest. Although Bennett did not voice it aloud, she permitted them to tag along, all the while feeling a sense of nostalgia. Hey, wait a minute. Why am I the only one left out? I'll come join you guys any moment now, so please wait for me. You guys, don't let go, okay? I haven't joined you guys yet. Alright, let's do it, everyone. First, shall we start off by showing ourselves to the people in the Ark and calming them down together with Esiikon? As for Alioth, we can just leave him behind. Megrez. Illustration from Alba Light Novel V8. The 7 heroes, accompanied by Blutgong and Levia, headed towards the Ark. That side should be fine if I leave it up to them. After being convinced of that, Rupas recalled the past and became amused. Once this battle is over, it might be a good idea to have a drink with those guys again. Rupas activated X-Gate and retrieved 2 swords from the Muffle Tower, then threw those swords in the direction of the Ark, towards Levia, towards Alioth, who was on top of it. It's a gift. Take it with you. Thanks, you're a lifesaver. When the Argonauti were summoned, the weapon that they had previously been using was also materialized using mana. However, that weapon was a mere recreation. It was not the real thing. Even though they were about to head into the final battle, if the so-called Sword King did not even have a proper weapon, it would look quite pathetic. Although, pathetic was a word which perfectly encapsulated Alioth's character, but after all, it would be his first battle after his return. It would be nice if he got to do something. Thinking something along those lines, Rupas generously lent him 2 from her collection. It was an action executed only because she believed that if it was Alioth, he would most likely be able to utilize it well. I'll head towards the wood Ouroboros. I'll properly settle it with my own hands. If Pollux is going, then I'll go with her. The fairy siblings, Pollux and Castor, voiced their desires to fight against the wood Ouroboros. For the 2 of them, the Wood Ouroboros was their original body, and at the same time, their parent. They could not give this fight away to anybody else. They had a strong determination in their eyes. Pollux. Rupaz handed a single ring to her. The ring was something that Rupaz had previously inadvertently acquired, the divine artifact, Chronos 7. It was a G.O. daily ring which, by slowing down time in the surroundings, allowed the wearer to enter a state where time was effectively stopped. Nevertheless, it was a defective product in that, as a trade-off for its effect, when the ring was taken off, all of the ACCU.malated time would flow back to the user all at once. However, Pollux was a fairy princess who had already existed for hundreds of thousands of years. For her, regardless of how much negative recoil she suffered, there would be absolutely no effect whatsoever. To begin with, as she was a fairy, the very concept of a lifespan did not exist for her. In other words, she was able to utilize this ring with absolutely no risks involved. Furthermore, Rupaz had tinkered with the ring a little in the meantime. Previously, the effect of the debuff enforced by the ring worked against the world at large. However, such an effect only served to hinder the wearer's allies. As such, Rupaz removed that effect from the ring and made it so that the ring only worked to purely increase the speed of the wearer. Take it with you. From now on, everyone's constantly going to be fighting in a state where time is dilated. If you don't have a toy like that, you won't even be able to keep up with the fight. You're right. I'll accept it, thank you. Pollux's actual fighting capacity was no different from that of an ordinary warrior. This meant that she would not be able to keep up at all with the battle which was to happen from this point onwards. It was not merely at the level of, she would not be helpful in a fight. She would not even be able to see the fight in the first place. In her current state, someone could very well be killed in the time she spent summoning a heroic spirit. In order to predict I.P.8 in the battle ahead, the ring was an item which was absolutely necessary for her. Then I'll take on the Earth Ouroboros. I'll go beat up this B.A.S.T.A.R.D who has the audacity to call himself the strongest even though I'm here. Then I guess I'll also head to the Earth Ouroboros. Pollux would be challenging the Wood Ouroboros, but there was still a need for someone else to challenge the Earth Ouroboros. In that regard, Leon and Ares were the first two individuals to volunteer. In that case, me will take on the Wood Ouroboros. After all, Pollux will need AS.H.I plus Eld. Virgo, the two of us will head to the Earth Ouroboros. Ares aside, if we leave this stupid lion to rampage about without someone to heal him, it's obvious that he's going to lose. Why, yes, Grandma. Who are you calling stupid lion, huh? I'm ill-matched against the Earth Ouroboros. So I'll be generous and go crush the tree. Me too. This was followed by Karkinos's, Pisces's, and Agakaros's decision to head towards the Wood Ouroboros. Similarly, Virgo and Parthinos volunteered to join the battlefield where the Earth Ouroboros was. You'll need someone to support you guys, right? Then I'll fight the Wood Ouroboros. I'll go and smash apart the Earth Ouroboros. Although I'm a bad match attribute-wise. Well, there shouldn't be any problem giving them support with my ability. I'll tag along with the group taking on the Earth guy. And finally, Sagittarius chose to head towards the Wood Ouroboros whilst Taurus and Aquarius chose to fight against the Earth Ouroboros. Without Rupaz having to say anything, the two teams were completed. On the side, the Argonauts also divided at their own discretion, then split into 4 teams so that they could supplement each party. Looking carefully, one could even see the figures of Phoenix and Hydrus, who had previously been left behind for the purpose of sealing the Ouroboroses. It seemed they had rushed back because the Ouroboroses had started moving. I'll go where my father is. Luna, you stay with the Ark. Terasama, I also want, you can't. This time, the battle will be on a completely different level. It seemed Terra would head towards ORM to support him. But Terra aside, Luna would not even be worth considering as a battle potential. This time alone, Terra would have no leeway to protect Luna. Luna understood that as well. She understood why, but even then, to allow Terra to head there alone whilst she stayed somewhere safe felt painful for her. Terra hugged her very firmly, then whispered as if to coax her. I'll be fine. I'll definitely come back. I won't die and leave you alone. It's a promise, okay? Yeah, it's a promise. Oi, stop it you fools. That's a super obvious death flag right there. Watching the two individuals who were hugging each other, Rupaz made a straight man retort without reading the atmosphere. There were not many who came back alive after hugging someone right before the final battle and promising that they would definitely come back. Most of them would end up dead. After seeing off the flying figure of Terra, who chased after ORM, Rupaz's eyes met with Scorpius's, who still remained behind. Are you not going? This mistress's battlefield is the place where Rupaz-sama is. Even though this is the final battle, she doesn't waver, huh? Feeling as such within her, Rupaz looked up into the sky thinking, whatever. Now, all she could do was trust them. Trust that all of her allies would return safe and sound. Chapter 174. The entirety of Midgard was suffering from extreme weather. The skies of Midgard were covered by the large frames of the Ouroboroses and dark clouds. It was as if the sun and the moon had been eaten by them. The great earth was torn apart, the seas withered away and the mountains crumbled into ruin. Thunder roared continuously without rest and a blizzard blew throughout the world regardless of the season as if it was trying to bury all of Midgard. It was what one would call doomsday. It was the world's dusk, caused by an all-out war between G.O.D and monsters, that would extinguish all life forms in this world. The day the world would come to an end had arrived. Oh, it's the Fimbul winter. It's the end of the world. Two people were Rus.H.I plus NG in to pray at churches which were now within the ark. However, there was no meaning to their prayers. After all, that very deity was their enemy. The priests were shouting as if they were having a panic attack, and the inside of the ark was shrouded in a dark and gloomy atmosphere. Similarly, at this moment, SEI was also within the ark, holding onto his head. He was currently at the core of the ark, in the main control room. There, many hobbits were working restlessly. Cameras, made through modern scientific achievements, were displaying various places within the ark on screens. Furthermore, SEI, along with other heroic figures and kings and queens of the various kingdoms, was standing at a seemingly important spot which was surrounded by many cameras, as if there was about to be a live broadcast. What exactly was she hoping that I'd do? Rupaz had told him that she hoped he would persuade and ease the worries of the people. No, that's impossible. As if hearing words from someone like me would put people at ease in this kind of situation. What a miserable brat you are. Why does Moffel think well of someone like you anyways? That's what I want to know. In the face of SEI, who was being faint-hearted, Bennett Nash showered him with scathing words. She then looked at the hobbits in the surroundings. When she did, they switched on something, as if they understood what she wanted. This action caused giant screens to appear in the skies. It's quite strange to say that there was a sky within the S.H.I plus P, but the S.H.I plus P was something which could accommodate the whole planet, so it was essentially no different from an artificial planet. Thus, the expression of the sky will purposefully be used, of every city within the ark. Bennett Nash was displayed on all of those screens. After Bennett Nash made sure that it was working properly, she took hold of the microphone and spoke into it. You hear me, right? Listen, people of Midgard. I'm Mjolnir's ruler, Bennett Nash. I don't have much time, so I'll get straight to the point. The whole of Midgard from the ground up has been peeled off and evacuated into this ark. Right now, on Midgard, there are Ouroboroses active. The end of the world has started already. After hearing what came out from Bennett Nash's mouth, people became rowdy. It was not something that they could readily believe. After all, for them, they only felt that there had been some strong winds which had swept by them for a very brief moment, yet by the time it was over, they were still met with a familiar city with no noticeable changes. Yes, the inside of the ark was. At the very least, for ordinary people, their towns were still in the same form and shape as before, when the land itself had been taken into the ark. Rupaz, with her extraordinary precision while using the skill, had managed to relocate people to their respective habitats with very minimal disturbances. Nevertheless, they understood that something had happened. Furthermore, they understood that that something was beyond the realm of their imagination. It was something that was both very remarkable and unusual. But there's nothing that you guys have to do. Just shut up and continue to live as you have been. That's all. Bennett Nash concluded her announcement by saying that, in a way, she had put in a lot of effort. But unfortunately, Bennett Nash was someone who was innately strong from birth. She could not understand the hearts of the weak. Although she had gotten to experience a little of what it felt to be in the position of the weak after having gained a rival known as Ruppaz, her very existence and every one of her actions was a perfect representation of what it meant to be a strong individual. If there was an enemy, all she had to do was defeat it. If there was a difficulty, all she had to do was smash through and overcome it. She would never even consider the thought of kneeling down, trembling in fear and curling into oneself in the first place. For her, it was simply impossible to understand and empathize with the fear and anxiety that the people were feeling. That's not going to help, is it? As if you'll be able to put anyone at ease with that. Huh? What do you mean? It's enough, isn't it? It's not enough at all. There are clearly better ways to phrase it. Then you do it. I'm going first. Looking bothered, Bennett Nash responded as such before flying out of the ark. Watching her leaving figure, Megrez laughed bitterly. No wonder Ruppaz left SEI here. Indeed, to calm down the hearts of the weak, one needs to be able to understand and empathize with their feelings. Truly, he's perfect for this role. In any event, with Bennett Nash's words, the people from Mjolnir have calmed down. So it's our turn next. Megrez adjusted what was displayed on the screens in the air so that he and the other 7 heroes were being displayed. He believed this would be the most effective first move. In particular, the figures of Alioth and Dubhi, who were supposed to have been dead, should give courage to their respective kingdoms. Yo, idiots of Leavitian. Does anyone know my face, MM? I'm more or less the founder of the kingdom, Alioth. I'm Dropnir's founder, Dubhi, Bear. Well, I say kingdom, but technically the beastkin just gathered together and somehow turned into a kingdom by the time I noticed, and I somehow became their emperor, but yeah, is this the time to be saying that? I'm Fekta. Although, my kingdom's already long perished, but anyways, it seems that my people are the ones who made this ark, so I suppose there's no need for me to calm anyone down. It's Merak. My citizens, please calm down and listen to what we have to say. Once the 7 heroes had eased the citizens of their respective kingdoms, everyone turned to look towards SEI. Although this is irrelevant information, Mizar did not end up saying anything in particular. This was because his citizens within Blutgong were savoring this situation and burning with eagerness. In fact, they had remained within Blutgong with the intention of predict.I.P. aiding in the upcoming final battle. Dwarves were very bold. Right now, Midgard is being salted by terrifying monsters, by the Ouroboroses. To combat this unprecedented situation, we've formed an alliance with that Ruppaz Moffel and the Demon King. Let me introduce you now to the one who managed to make this alliance possible, the one from another world who answered our summons and appeared in this world, the hero, SEI. In response to Megrez casually introducing him in such an amazing way, SEI's eyes almost rolled back. Hey, wait a minute. Did I just hear myself being described as something appalling? For I feel like I just got turned into the primary mastermind, or rather, the leader of the alliance between the 7 heroes, Ruppaz, the demi-humans, and the demon race without my input. SEI looked at Megrez as if to admonish him, but Megrez simply smiled back warmly. Additionally, it seemed that the words Megrez had casually made up were very effective. After hearing the statement that the symbols of fear, such as Ruppaz and the Demon King, had become their allies, the people's hearts were filled with hope. As the one who had achieved that great feat, the name of the hero was etched into their minds. The more a person was pushed into a corner, the more they would want to cling to hope and wars.h.I+p an idol. The news of the emergence of the hero and the announcement of the establishment of an alliance turned into their hope and ran through their minds like a jolt of electricity. The hero. Hero, SEI. Oh. It's the hero. Hiro-sama. Hiro-sama. Subsequently, a few people in each kingdom and city started raising their voices. They were the Rangers who had previously traveled together with SEI and his group, but they had been left behind after SEI and the rest had met with Ruppas and received Tanaka and Suzuki as modes of transportation. Because they were earnest in their work, they scattered across various cities like cherry blossoms with the intention of hyping up the hero in each of their respective locations. The call for the hero resounded throughout various cities and kingdoms, and the expectations for that hero throughout the arc brimmed. On the other hand, after having become the person in question, SEI could no longer do anything but laugh it off. Hi everyone. I'm SEI, and I'm more or less the hero right now. SEI took hold of the microphone with a stiff expression and started with an introduction. It was clear that his misfortune would continue for a while. The Ouroboros of the earth roared, then proceeded to drop the hammer of justice on the fools who had the audacity to challenge a deity. However, its movement abruptly halted as it caught sight and looked down at the small people who were standing below it. There stood Leon, who was at the foremost, followed by Aries, Taurus, Virgo, Parthenos, Aquarius, and Ganymedes. Additionally, there were also Phoenix, Hydrus, and the three-winged knights, who came to support this battle. Those who had giant forms had already transformed into them and were fully enhanced and prepared to engage in battle. Taurus, for example, had turned his upper body into that of a bull whilst his lower body remained as that of a human. Overall, his appearance had changed into that of a minotaur, and he was holding onto an axe. Leon and the others had similarly turned into giant forms corresponding to their T.I.Tles and towered into the sky. But this time alone, they were the smaller challengers. Small ones. You are impertinent enough to challenge me. The Earth Ouroboros scoffed at them. Even though all it did was open its mouth to speak, the atmosphere trembled and a storm brewed. Ouroboroses were personifications of something transcendent. Irrespective of how insignificant its individual actions were, each and everything that it did would lead to a catastrophe. When they spoke, a storm would brew. When they breathed, a cyclone would pass. When they moved, an earthquake would be triggered and a tidal wave would rise. If the ones here had not been Leon and the others, they would not have even been able to remain standing. You shall have the honor of being squished in an instant. The Earth Ouroboros' eyes shone, and then the S.P.A.C. around them distorted. At the same time, Parthenos shouted. It's coming. Block it, Virgo. Why, yes. Vindemiatrix. Gravity amplification x 10,000. The compressed mana acted as a supergravity attack which dispersed with the Earth Ouroboros as the center. The very next moment, the Earth caved in as if it had suddenly disappeared, changing the very shape of the planet. Fortunately, thanks to the mana erasure skill that Virgo had cast at the very last second, the ground that they were standing on managed to remain in place. It was as if the place they were standing on had been turned into a cliff. The ground disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. It was crushed. Aquarius calmly gave an explanation for the confused Aries, who did not understand what had just happened. Nevertheless, her facial expression was quite grim. They had antic.I.P.aided it, but even then, after personally witnessing the difference in dimensions between themselves and the Ouroboros, they could not help but feel uneasy. The attack which had taken place was most likely far from its full power. In all likelihood, it would equate to nothing more than a light sweep for them. But even something of that degree had this much power. Indeed, they were the representatives of the deity. There was a clear difference in scale. Humph, although its power was scattered, to think that it would be prevented. Then I suppose next time, I'll amplify it by 100,000 times. The Earth Ouroboros opened its mouth and gathered gravitational force within its mouth. It formed it into a cannonball with an extremely high gravitational force that it could crush even a planet with its pull. It was attempting to fire something like that at any moment. In the face of the ominous rumbling sound ringing from it, everyone scattered from the spot without being told to do so. As Parthenos and Virgo were riding on Aries, they were carried away without having to dodge it for themselves. Terra Graviton. 5. The ball of compressed gravity was released, and it progressed towards Leon and the rest whilst it ate away at the planet. Knowing that they would not be able to get away scot-free if they were hit directly by it, everyone dodged away from it before switching into the offensive. The one to lead the offense was Leon. The King of Lions kicked the air, then shot towards the Earth Ouroboros whilst baring its fangs. Repulsion force 6. However, the moment Leon attempted to get close to it, he was repelled by something as if he was being pushed away by someone. The repulsive force, which prevented anyone from getting close to it, was something that not even Leon could readily overcome. Move. I'll shatter it. However, irrespective of whether it was gravity force or repulsive force, as long as it was some form of skill or magic, it was irrelevant to Taurus. After being buffed by Virgo and increasing his speed to the limit, he came before Leon and readied himself. He then swung his giant war axe. The next moment, there was a sound of something shattering and the repulsive force disappeared. Not wasting the opportunity, Aries, Aquarius, Phoenix, and Hydrus all attacked at the same time. Messerthem version 3. Absolute 0. Osha.n.u.s. 7 Prometheus. 8 4 different torrents of power directly hit the Earth Ouroboros, causing an explosion to occur. Although the Earth Ouroboros initially received those attacks in a disinterested manner, as a result of a few of its proud scales being burned, it narrowed its eyes. An Ouroboros's scales were not something which would crack or burn from ordinary attacks. Even in practice, Prometheus, Osha.n.u.s and Absolute Zero had only managed to destroy one of its scales. However, Messerthem alone had managed to burn away a few of its scales. I see, it looks like there's one who might potentially become a threat. I guess I'll squish that first. The Earth Ouroboros opened its mouth towards Ares and, without a moment of delay, fired a roar imbued with gravity. Although Virgo promptly used Vindemiatrix and attempted to prevent the attack, the amount of mana imbued into the attack was leagues apart from what she was expecting. Nevertheless, she was able to erase most of the mana within the attack. In fact, she was able to erase about 90% of the effect. However, as the original effect for the attack increased the gravitational force by 100,000 times, even when 90% of the effect was negated, the effect still increased the gravitational force by 10,000 times. Ares used his body as a wall to S.H.I plus Eld Virgo and part Helios from the attack at the last moment. As a result, he was directly showered by the attack. If it's something like this, I'll be able to bear with it. As Ares was thinking something along those lines, the Earth Ouroboros opened its mouth once more. A second strike? It's too quick. The act of covering for Virgo had come back to bite him. With the position that they were in, the gravity amplification effect would arrive before Virgo would be able to get in front of Ares and erase the mana. The Earth Ouroboros was planning to crush the three of them using extreme gravity. But Leon boldly leapt in between them. UB.A.S.T.A.R.D. Quit ignoring me. I am not. At the same time as Leon leapt between them, the Earth Ouroboros faced towards Leon. Faced with such a quick change in aim, Leon's eyes opened wide in surprise and the world as seen by those eyes distorted. Immediately after, he was H.I.T. A gravitational force which could crush even planets directly exploded into Leon's body and he was flung up into the air. Each individual attack was limited to 99,999 damage. As a consequence, it was impossible to defeat Leon with just a single move, or at least, that was how it should have been. However, it just so happened that whilst the attack was in effect, the damage continuously stacked up. Even though it was just a single attack, as long as the target did not manage to break free from the gravitational force, damage would be dealt continuously, such that even with Leon's HP, it could be shaved all the way down to 0 in a short period of time. Tisk, you piece of S.H.I plus T. Leon somehow managed to struggle out of the area of effect where the gravity was amplified. However, he collapsed down onto the ground below. Although there was no one present with the skill-observing eye, if there had been someone, they would see that Leon only had 50,000 HP remaining after that single attack and had entered into a range where he was susceptible to an instant death. Nevertheless, the severity of the damage that Leon had just suffered was clearly visible to everyone. Confronted with such a scenario, silence hung in the air among everyone, and only the Earth Ouroboros's voice loudly resounded. You probably had some confidence in your abilities. Did you also think that you would be able to win if you came at me with numbers? How laughable. Did you really think that we, as the representatives of the G.O.Dis, would be that weak? I suggest that you cease underestimating the Ouroboroses. Met with heavy words, N.O. Body was able to respond. Virgo, in particular, was not even able to stop trembling in fear. A fear brought forth by an absolute being known as an Ouroboros. Such an emotion was slowly creeping in on that place. Chapter 175 Everyone, let's work together. We have no chance of winning if we each fight him on our own. Ganymedes, put me on top of the sheep brat. Tauros, you come too. It's Taurus. After Aquarius shouted that, Taurus got on top of Aries as per her instructions. Furthermore, Ganymedes also jumped onto Aries' back, all the while holding onto Aquarius. This action was replicated by the three winged knights. Phoenix and Hydrus, who were unable to get onto Aries themselves due to their sizes, each stood to either side of him and then stared back at the Ouroboros. Alright, listen up, everyone. It's vexing, but that B.A.S.T.A.R.D's leagues above us. If we challenge it without coordinating our movements, we don't stand a chance. Fortunately for us, we have a way of fighting against him. The little girls, Virgo, Vindemiatrixes, Giga Graviton Rapid Fire. 2 Aquarius tried to convey a strategy to her allies, but the Ouroboros they were facing was not a naive enemy who would leisurely wait whilst the enemy had a conversation mid-battle. It started firing barrages of gravity bullets without holding back, causing Aries to run around desperately trying to avoid them. Each shot was not as strong as the Terra Graviton which had knocked Leon down earlier. Nevertheless, in exchange for the decrease in power, the interval between each individual shot was shortened to the point where it looked like a machine gun. The whole spectacle of the gravity bullets gouging into the Earth and making the planet full of holes almost looked hilarious. It looked just as if B.A.L.S of dirt were gradually being scooped away, bit by bit, using a spoon. In any event, even after the might of the individual shots were weakened, those gravity bullets were still a threat for Aries and the rest. Now that Rupes had completely regained her powers, their levels were at level 1000. Inevitably, their defense and HP had increased. Yet, even then, they were likely to become unable to move if they were hit by just 3 of them. You piece of S.H.I+T. Can't you wait while we're having a strategic meeting? Like I care. Aquarius jeered at the Earth Ouroboros, but it was pointless. She then clicked her tongue and continued what she had been saying before. Anyways, our little girl here can negate that guy's attacks a bit, combining that with my skill, we can avoid his attacks as long as it's not an area of effect skill. The only one who can penetrate through his defense is Tauros. Whilst the only thing that did any damage to him was the sheep's flames. It's Taurus. It's about time you start remembering my name properly. I'll be on evasion duty, while the little girl's on defense. Tauros and the sheep will be on offense. The grilled bird and the blue snake, you two will act as support. I'm an immortal bird. It's water snake. I don't even know what to say anymore. Although Aquarius herself thought that she was giving orders earnestly, her disposition of being unable to remember people's names caused her orders to come across as a bit weird. Nevertheless, the instructions that she gave were very precise. If everyone got on top of Aries, then they would only need to put in minimal effort towards defense and evasion. The attacks aimed towards Aries would be redirected by Aquarius's skills and the attacks which could not be avoided would be negated by Virgo. The opponent's defense would be shattered by Taurus and Aries would ultimately be the one dealing damage. If Phoenix, Hydrus, and the 3 winged knights were able to provide support and distract the enemy's attention, it would be perfect. The enemy was someone who could defeat even Leon with a single hit. There would be no chance of winning if they fought separately in their own accord. If everyone did not work together, there was no way they could win. Let's go. Sadikbia. Charge in, sheep. After receiving the absolute evasion buff from Aquarius, Aries fired flames from his hooves and ran in the air. In response, the Ouroboros opened its mouth once again and continuously fired more gravity bullets. But all of the shots were automatically redirected from Ares and could not even scratch him. By the time the Ouroboros understood that what was happening was due to the effect of a skill, Ares had already gotten right in front of its face and Taurus was swinging his axe down on its head. With a single blow of Aldebaran, the repulsion force field was shattered, allowing Ares's flames to directly connect. Subsequently, Ares slid by the Ouroboros and created some distance before he changed direction and charged in once more. Impudent! The Earth Ouroboros muttered in annoyance and fired gravity bullets once again. But the ones that were fired this time were different from before, as they started pulling in everything from their surroundings. The ones that had been fired before could be described as a form of heavy pressure. It was a skill to crush an enemy down using gravity. In contrast, the ones fired this time were based on attraction. It was a skill that pulled everything in its surroundings towards it and could not be evaded. In other words, this was one form of an absolute accuracy skill. Did you assume that you can ignore my skills just by using absolute accuracy skills? Don't look down on me. Skill, the one who swallows, Albali. 3 Ganymedes positioned the water pitcher and the figure of a little girl disappeared into it. At the same time, she sucked the gravity shot towards herself. Despite the difference in size, it was swallowed by the water pitcher. Reflect. Of all things that could have happened, the gravity shot hit the Earth Ouroboros. This successfully caused his movement to momentarily stop. At that moment, Ares charged into attack, Unleash.H.I plus NG the G.O.D slaying flames on it once again. Did you think that sucking things in is exclusive to you? You're too naive. The Earth Ouroboros did not respond to her with words, but instead increased the gravitational effect of the entire place. With this, evasion was impossible and it also could not be sucked away like before. However, this effect was negated by Virgo's skill, giving Ares a small opening to charge in again. Taurus shattered the repulsion force field, Ares burned the Ouroboros and the other members applied further pressure. Now, aim at the spot where its scales got burned. Got it. Let's go, Hydrus. All right. After receiving instructions from Aquarius, Phoenix, and Hydrus opened their mouths. They then correspondingly and rapidly fired shots of flame or water one after another, concentrating at the particular spot that Ares had scorched. Furthermore, the 3 winged knights, Pavo, Apis, and Corvus, aimed and shot their attacks at the eyeball of the Ouroboros, creating a smoke screen to block its vision. As an Ouroboros, even its Ib.A.L.L.S were strong beyond all common sense, but nevertheless, it was still enough to hinder its vision for a brief period of time. In that duration, Ares said by Leon, allowing Virgo to use healing skills on him. Because Leon had been hit by the area of effect gravity amplification attack, he was moments away from death, but this would be sufficient to allow him to return to battle. Notwithstanding that, the Earth Ouroboros was still not agitated in the slightest. It was only natural to. After all, it had not gotten serious yet, but it was planning to do so from now on. Very well. I will also fight properly. As soon as he said that, Ares was sucked towards him. Although Ares quickly got a hold of himself and tried to ground himself, his body was still being pulled little by little. The same thing was happening to Phoenix and Hydrus. During this time, Virgo was desperately holding on to Parthenos with one hand and Ares with the other so that Parthenos would not fall off, thus she was preoccupied. But as if to mock the predicament that they were in, a shower of meteors came closing in from outer S.P.A.C. The Earth Ouroboros itself was serving as a gravity-inducing Ma.S.S, pulling all of the stray asteroids from S.P.A.C towards it. Not good. Avoid it, sheep. Ares madly dashed about and dodged the meteor shower. One after another, meteors gouged into the earth of Midgard and flames riled up from everywhere one could see. The ground itself, on the other hand, was splattered upwards and then came falling back down from the sky like it was raining. The whole situation was as if the entirety of Midgard was being blanketed by magma. With how things had developed, Midgard was no longer a habitable planet. Yet even then, Ares's speed did not drop and he continued to avoid the meteor shower, but, when a vast area of Midgard was suddenly covered by a dark shadow, everyone paled. What they saw was a giant meteor with a diameter of a few kilometers. Whilst they were all categorized as meteors, the ones up until now were only a few meters wide. Even then, each had enough destructive power to create a crater dozens of kilometers wide, destroying everything within that range. But the one coming down this time was on a completely different scale. If something like this were to hit the planet, it was very possible that Midgard itself would be destroyed. 4S, S.H.I plus T. Faced with this despairing predicament, such a thought ran through Aquarius's mind. From the very beginning, the Ouroboroses, no, the G.O.Dis never minded the damage which would be inflicted on the planet itself. They had had a faint hope that she would mind it a little. They had held on to the fleeting hope that perhaps the enemy would not give it their all in consideration of the damage which would be done to the planet. But now, they understood. It had never been in their consideration. This was exactly the reason why Ruppes had evacuated as many of Midgard's inhabitants as possible. Whilst it might have been a forceful move, Ruppes's decision was in the right. Tisk, shoot it down. Aquarius's command almost sounded like a scream and everyone who could attack began attacking simultaneously. For example, although Ares was fully occupied with avoiding the other falling meteors, Aquarius, who was on top of him, could switch to destroying the incoming one. Similarly, Phoenix, Hydrus and Leon looked up whilst the three winged knights flew up towards the falling meteor and started hacking at it. Tisk. Hydrus. I know. Phoenix and Hydrus gathered as much power as possible in their mouths and launched a jet of flame and a stream of water respectively at the falling meteor. Those two attacks, combined with Aquarius's magic and Leon's roar, hit the descending gigantic meteor that was making it look like the sky was falling, and blasted it into pieces. The meteor, which had now shattered into countless smaller pieces, hailed all around the area while Phoenix and the rest shot them down one after another. Of course, they were not able to shoot all of them away, but nevertheless, lessening their number helped Ares. Graviton Wave 5. But seeing their action as an eyesore, the Earth Ouroboros opened its mouth. This was followed by an invisible roar, which could only be described as a gravitational wave, PAS. Sing by in front of Phoenix. Right after the gravitational wave PAS. Said in front of him, there was no one left in front of Phoenix. Until just a moment ago, Hydrus had certainly been standing in front of him. But now, not even a single trace of him was left. Hydrus had disappeared very anticlimactically. He probably would not have even realized that he had disappeared himself. Hydrus? Oh, oi, where did you go? Hydrus. Calling out the name of his rival, Phoenix stood there dumbfounded. But he was only stupefied for a fraction of a moment. In the very next moment, he had turned into a raging flame and was filled with anger. Why, UB.A.S.T.A.R.D. Was it you? You were the one who did that to Hydrus. Calm down, grilled chicken. You're playing right into his hands. Phoenix, who was now enveloped in flames, failed to listen to Aquarius's restraining words. Losing himself in his anger, he charged straight towards the Earth Ouroboros. Unfortunately, there was no way that a straightforward frontal A.S. Salt would be effective against the Earth Ouroboros. In the end, all that his attack managed to do was crack one of the scales on the Earth Ouroboros. He was then hit by the gravitational wave that the Earth Ouroboros used as a counterattack, and the right side of his body was erased away. Even then, he continued to spew words of resentment and attempted to attack. Regrettably, Phoenix was erased by the Earth Ouroboros's follow-up attack without a trace, just as Hydrus was. Whilst he might have been an immortal bird, he was not able to avoid dying when his whole body was erased. Phoenix. Hydrus. There's no time for you to be minding what happened, sheep. Our skills won't be able to keep up, so focus on avoiding things. Ares continued to run in the air and desperately avoided the meteor shower. Normally, there was no way he would have been able to avoid something of this degree. However, at that very moment in time, he was distracted by the Earth Ouroboros itself. Ares was unable to maneuver at even 10% of his full capacity. It was not as if all that Aquarius was doing was giving out orders. They had only managed to survive up until this point because she had been continuously and relentlessly casting absolute evasion skills. But unfortunately, due to the constant stream of attacks, the absolute evasion skills that had been endowed on them had already been used up. The skills were not able to keep up with the constant barrages of attacks. Noticing the delay in their actions, it turned into a prime opportunity for the opponent and an extremely detrimental lapse in judgment for Ares and the rest. The three winged knights were unable to dodge in time and were also erased after being hit by the meteor shower, dwindling their numbers further. Subsequently, the Earth Ouroboros opened its mouth wide and aimed at Ares, then there was a splatter of blood. While Ares and the rest were fighting the Earth Ouroboros, Pollux, and the others in her group were also engaged in a hard battle at a different place. Her group's opponent was the Ouroboros of wood. Going against it were the fairy siblings, Agacaros, Pisces, Carcinos, and Sagittarius. Supporting them was the S.H.I+P, Argo, and the heroic spirits called forth by Pollux. Nevertheless, the progress of the battle was by no means in their favor. No, if one were to be honest with themselves, they were definitely in a disadvantaged position. Not only was the Ouroboros's defense extremely solid, any damage which could be dealt to it was quickly regenerated. The Ouroboroses were the beings which maintained the balance of the world. As a consequence, they would always be backed up by the very world they existed in. This was how Pollux had access to unlimited SP. As her true original body, it was only natural that the wood Ouroboros would also be able to utilize the powers that she had. As a result, any superficial damage done to it was no different from having done no damage whatsoever. Not only was it extremely difficult to deal damage in the first place, any damage done would ultimately be negated. Calling it a cheat would still be an understatement. How could this be? The wood Ouroboros, which is our original body, is, Pollux ground her teeth, mortified. They had been prepared to have a hard time. They knew that it would not be an easy battle. But even then, they could not have predicted that it would turn out like this. Yes, that's right. There was no way that they could have predicted something like this. That the wood Ouroboros, which was their real body, was so, hi-oh-ho-ho-ho-ho-ho-ho. Delightful, delightful. Hey, what happened? Are you done already, Even though you were so pumped up when you first arrived, you look so pitiful now, don't you, Yeah, it's fine even if you attack me more, you know? I'll receive it all without fighting back, you hear? Hiri, why not try landing a hit on this old man's face at least once, Right here. Is, such an annoying old geezer. Ho 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 ho, how mortifying, how mortifying. The wood Ouroboros had turned out to be, how should one put it? It had a completely different personality from that which Pollux had predicted it would have. As a representative of the creation deity, she had assumed on her own accord that it would be overflowing with a majestic aura and would be stern and rigid in personality. Indeed, she was the one who had assumed the personality of someone she had never personally met before. She could not help but be forced to admit that she was the one who had wrongly imposed her own assumptions on others. But even then, she had wanted it to be something more reasonable. The appearance of the wood Ouroboros, which was turning its head from side to side as if to flame the situation, in fact, was flaming the situation, and sticking its tongue out as if to make a fool of his opponent, was very annoying, to say the least. Fine then. Fine, I'll do just that. Come here, heroic spirits. Everyone, attack at once. Pollux shouted out in anger, then summoned even more heroic spirits. If the opponent was the greatest in quality, then she would be the greatest in quant.I.Ti. Numerous heroic spirits flew in front of her and all activated their skills simultaneously. There were so many arrays of different colored beams that they filled up the entire sky. They were all aimed towards the wood Ouroboros and landed on it directly, but that was not all. Not only were the cannons on the Argo fired, Sagittarius, Agacaros, Pisces and Castor also slammed the wood Ouroboros with their arcane magic. The crab, which was unable to use arcane magic, decided to at least clank his scissors. Even though it was already the final battle, he was a useless man as usual. A flame pillar rose, piercing the sky, and an area of land equal to the area of the continent of Africa on Earth disappeared at once. However, after the residual smoke cloud from that explosion lifted, what remained was the unaffected appearance of the wood Ouroboros. Delightful, delightful. It was a good ma.s.sage. Next time, message my back, alright? You see, I'm a bit stiff after having just woken up. Oh. Wait, was that supposed to have been an attack just now? In that case, I might have said something rude, Gee. Pollux wordlessly screamed before, in her fury, making an expression that she normally would not show to others. She then summoned even more heroic spirits and continuously activated skills to strike at the wood Ouroboros with the intention of brute-forcing her way through using numbers. However, the moment she did so, she was assaulted by a sense of lethargy that she had never felt before and collapsed onto the floor of the Argo. Although she somehow managed to catch herself by using her hands to break her fall, she was unable to put any strength into her arms. Her arms were trembling and she was unable to put any strength into her feet as well. Her vision distorted and she started to sweat. What happened? Unable to understand what was happening to herself, she was left in a state of confusion whilst suffering from an unknown phenomenon. Sensing an abnormality with Pollux's condition, Castor went to her but was unable to find any injury whatsoever. There were also no traces of her being poisoned. They were truly unable to figure out what might have been the cause. In response to their predicament, the wood Ouroboros provided an answer. It happened much quicker than I was expecting it to. Well, never mind, regardless of that, you did well. You do. I haven't done anything, you know. You just used too much of your power and collapsed on your own. Well, in other words, you just ran out of SP. Ran out of SP, for those who predict I.P.aided in battles, it was a sensation that they would no doubt have to endure at least once, but it was something which was generally unrelated to Pollux. She was the fairy princess. As an avatar of the Ouroboros, she was constantly backed up by the world itself, and as such, her SP was infinite. As a consequence, she had never once ran out of SP. It just could not happen. I ran out of SP? Could it be? Looks like you figured it out. That's right, you had infinite power because you were my avatar, and you became an enemy to me. You're no longer backed up by the world, you know. Tisk. Although, it's the same for me. Now that the world is breaking apart to this extent, it's laughable to talk about this backup thing. The skill, Return of the Heroic Spirits, Argonautai, had an overpowered effect, but in return, it had an extremely high SP consumption rate. The only reason Pollux was able to use it despite this was because she had access to unlimited power. Now that her power was no longer infinite and had become finite, one would not need to think hard to understand that her reserves would be quickly exhausted if she continued to use the skill. If she had thought about it a little, she should have been able to predict it appropriately. She should have thought about it beforehand. Pollux cursed her own carelessness and felt ashamed that she had allowed such a disgraceful behavior to happen during the final battle. Even though they were in this predicament, the wood Ouroboros did not follow up and attack, and instead spoke to them refres.h.I plus ngly. Isn't this enough? You should understand the difference in our strength by now. Pollux looked up at the wood Ouroboros and boldly glared at it. It was not an enemy that would be taken aback just because she glared at it. However, she at least wanted to show that her heart had not yet been broken. Yes, she understood the difference in their strength. So what? Was she supposed to just let it kill her without resistance? But the subsequent words spoken by the wood Ouroboros were not something that Pollux had antic.I.P.aided. If you stop now, it should still be fine. You should stop fighting and plead with the G.O.dis for forgiveness. If you do so, the G.O.dis will most likely forgive you. I'll come and plead with you, so, my child, why not put a stop to this and grow out of this somewhat late rebellious phase? It was as if the wood Ouroboros was coaxing a child who was not listening to what they were being told. It was as if it was trying to persuade her. With a kind and gentle voice, the wood Ouroboros said this to Pollux.